if you avoid love because you've been hurt by love, then the pain of your hurt actually is what guides your decisions, not informs them, guides them. Because if you really, there's a old proverb that goes something along the lines of knowledge is a nuisance till it becomes integrated. And I really think a lot about that one of the rules I made actually when I left the engagement was that I would have every conversation I didn't want to have because those were the ones that mattered.
Hello and welcome to the Time Has Come podcast. My name is Graham Wardle, and we are streaming live right now to our members of timehascome.com for this live interview podcast recording with Mark Groves. I'm very excited to speak with him. I first met Mark years ago at a Monetize Your Mind conference in Kananaskis, Alberta, with Sarah Swain there and wonderful speakers and people coming together and collectively sharing their wisdom and their insights. Mark was there. I chatted with him backstage. Fantastic human being, very funny, very compassionate man. And we got along. And I was like, you know what? I would love to chat with this guy in the future. And I bumped into him again. I think it was maybe a year or so later. We were walking through the grocery store in Calgary in the Community Natural Foods. And I said, hey, that's Mark Groves. And so I went up to him, we had a chat. Anyways, long story short, he's on the podcast today. And I'm so excited to chat with him. I want you guys to grab yourself a pen and paper, okay? Because Mark's all about relationships. So I want you to think about a relationship in your life that you want to improve. There's some growth that you want there, that you want to dive into it. I want to make this personal for you and valuable to you. So think about a relationship in your life that you want to improve. Maybe it's some with your finances. Maybe it's a relationship with your significant other. It could be a relationship with someone who's passed on, who's no longer here. Or it could be a relationship that you want to create that you don't have yet. So get a pen and paper, write it down, or make a mental note. Because today, we're going to be exploring relationships that shape our lives, what gets in the way, and how we have the power to choose what we want to create and how we want to love. That's what Mark's all about. He is the founder of Create the Love. Mark Groves is a human connection specialist, public speaker, author, coach, podcast host, founder of Create the Love. He is born with an innate curiosity and hunger for truth. Mark's journey of self-discovery and personal liberation has led him to spend the last decade coaching and inspiring millions worldwide to create the life and love they desire. So the time has come to welcome Mark Groves to the show. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, Mark. Awesome, man. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. We got so much to cover. We got just a little bit of time here, and then we're going to launch into our after party with our members of timehascome.com. So I want to start by laying some groundwork about relationship, just kind of seeing the scope of the power of relationships. And I wanted to ask you, if we wanted to understand the fundamentals of a healthy and fulfilling relationship, where would we start? What would we talk about? How do we set the stage for that?
So many of us enter relationship having not done that exploration. So, it's a good way to begin because we find ourselves awakening in relationship thinking, how did I get here? Or we date without standards, principles. We don't understand what our values are. And then we're not even clear on what we want. And then we sort of just pick whatever feels like we get what someone might call chemistry with. So the foundation of it, when you look at the research, the real baseline characteristics that create really healthy relationships are kindness and generosity. So look for someone who's kind, look for someone who's generous. But I'd say you have to get really clear on what are your values. Like, who are you as an individual? What do you value in your life? And a lot of us are not even sure what our values are because we maybe grew up in a family where we were orienting around other people. Maybe there was an alcoholic, maybe there was a narcissistic parent, maybe both. Even someone with a chronic illness that can cause us to always be orienting around someone else's needs, someone maybe with an eruptive anger. And so we're always thinking about other people to keep the system safe. So then when I ask someone who's been through that, what do you want? What do you value? They've never been really internally oriented. And so a good way to figure out what you value is to look at people you admire. So you just think, who do I admire? Because people you admire are generally because of the values that they embody. So if you want to create really healthy relationships, that as a baseline is just knowing what you value, because your relationships then have to orient around those values. And your boundaries are what protect those values. And then just from like a simple, perspective, it'd be like, what are your deal breakers? Do they drink? Do they not drink? Do they want kids? Do they not want them? All the simple stuff.
Yeah, awesome. So relationships are, all of life is a relationship, is it not? Like it's understanding our relationship. I know you talk a lot about technology and our relationship technology and devices and the internet, but all of our life is a relationship. And where do we start with understanding how to form better relationships with the different aspects of our life? Is it getting to know yourself?
Well, you're dead on. It's like everything that's not you, you're in a relationship with. Now, of course, you're obviously in a relationship with yourself, with your own internal dialogue, and you're negotiating. Again, when survival, Gabor Mate talks about how we have two needs. We have the need for self-expression, and we have the need to be authentic. But when self-expression threatens authenticity, self-expression usually is what we compromise. Because authenticity is what we want to compromise. I totally butchered that. We have the need for connection and authenticity, but when authenticity threatens connection usually wins. Which means if me being authentically me threatens a relationship, a relationship in a family, a romantic relationship, a friendship, a culture, I will forego my own self-expression and my own authenticity to maintain the relationship. So what I see is that everything that you have friction with, so that could be a relationship to food, that could be a relationship to your body, that could be a relationship to your phone, that could be a relationship to a romantic partner. They're all offering you information about where you're not yet free. So they're all bringing material forward for you to heal triggers, heal wounds, and insert choice, because there's a saying that the opposite of trauma is choice. So when we experience something like trauma, usually choice is taken from us. So the healing of that experience would be to insert choice back into our lives and in every possible area we can. That's why something as simple as make your bed seems like it's such a silly directive. But the reason it's so powerful is because when you make a promise to yourself and you keep it, and you witness yourself doing something you say you're going to do, those micro moments build evidence within a bank of your own self-trust. And that shows up as when you're presented with an old pattern versus a new one, or alignment versus misalignment, you choose alignment.
Wow, dude. Awesome, man. We got so much to talk about in this podcast, and I love already some of the nuggets you've dropped. I like that about choice and the power that we have to choose in those moments, and then building that relationship with ourselves and the power of our word. That's something I have learned. And I always think of it like a superhero character or like a video game character. When you're choosing your video game hero or whatever, and you can see the different point scores for the different abilities they have. Yeah. I think of it that way, like honoring my word, like that is like a scale. And it's like, the more you do that, the more power it has as you put investment into that bank, I love that. Well, Mark, for those people out there who don't know how you got to where you are, one of the things I've heard you say that I really like is you said, your mess becomes your message. So I'm not sure if you coined that term, but I want to know.
I would like to have, but no, I didn't. Yeah.
I would like to
trademark.
Trademark. I'd like to know how you turned your mess into your message, where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
When I was young, I really loved relationships. My brother used to make fun of me and say that I loved love. And, at the time I was like, no, I don't. But I really did. It was true. It was an accurate observation. I thought I was good at relationships when I was young. I was a little afraid of getting hurt by people, but I feel like the desire to love, which I think is true for everybody till it's sort of either traumatized or socialized or both out of them. And so in my early relationships, I experienced betrayal, and that led me to really becoming much more avoidant. Like I started to then avoid relationships. I had unconsciously created this story that when I let people love me, they betray me. That when I love people, they lie to me. And I actually lose myself. I don't stand up for myself in that process. So that was all stuff that later on I really realized was unconsciously driving my life. So where before I was like, okay, I'm just all in on love. Then I realized when I got really betrayed, I then went, well, I'm not all in on love because that's ridiculous. Why would I do that? It just leads to pain and suffering. So I'll just dance around love. I'll, enter relationships with unavailable people. If someone really can love me, I'll come up with all the reasons in the world to run from them. And so at the same time, I was in sales. So I was studying human behavior, but really from the perspective of how do I get people to change their behavior from a more manipulative, like change from one product to another. But in order to prevent being hurt, I was reading books like The Game, like dating books. And so I was a pharmaceutical rep, and I was engaged at 27, and then I ended that engagement. And I remember when I ended that engagement, I started reading. I had asked people, what book totally changed your life? These motivational speakers that we would get at our work. And the book I got more often than not was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So I read it, and I will never forget where I was sitting, because it was the first time that I'd ever thought that maybe my life was about more than just becoming a provider and getting married by 27 and making a certain amount of money to be able to be valuable as a partner. Mm-hmm. I never thought about that. I never thought like maybe I'm here for something and maybe meaning is actually the purpose of life. I didn't know. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how did I get to this place in my life? Like, I made choices to get here, but it doesn't feel like I've been conscious about them for the last 10 years. How did I become so disconnected from myself? So I started to study romantic relationships because I thought that was my mess. Why am I so good at sales and all these other things, but yet when it comes to communication and romance, I'm not, which isn't a skill set issue. There's something else going on. So then I started to study them. I went back to school, took positive psychology, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is like the science of thriving. Why is no one talking about how to make relationships thrive? And this was, of course, 18 years ago. So now it's like everyone on TikTok talks about relationships thriving. So it's great. We've got we've got a lot of information. Things still aren't that much better, but hey. My mess really, I started to write. And that was the first way that I was taking what I was ashamed of, like what I'd done, how I'd behaved when I was younger, not having boundaries, my relationship to alcohol. I tried to have a one-night stand and I couldn't get an erection, so I wrote about that. And so I started to really think like it became a way that I excised my shame. So I would write about what I learned about the things I was most ashamed of. And people started to relate to that. And so, my friend once said to me, if you want to find what you love, find what breaks your heart. And for me, that was very much like witnessing people leaving relationships or in relationships totally disconnected from themselves, or leaving them and feeling broken, even though that them leaving might be the very loving thing to have done. And I started to see how society would shame anybody for relational endings. I think because we're all terrified of our relationships ending. So when someone else's does, we'd rather shame them than learn from them. And I know this has been a journey similar for you, which was I started to see how communities that really saw pain as transformational, like by learning from the suffering of another person, the whole community could be enriched. I thought, why do we not sit down people who've been betrayed or have betrayed, or people going through divorces or breakups or whatever it is? Why are we not sitting down with them and saying, teach us? Instead, we're saying, don't be like them. As where there was so much medicine in witnessing someone actually leave something that was unloving or just not aligned. So that's my message.
Yeah, and I love that, dude. Having been through a divorce myself, that was a thing that I faced of I guess you could call it like a cultural thing where people judged that and didn't want to see it as something that as a positive thing. It was like, oh, you failed. It was a failure. It was
right.
You failed at that. And I do think that on the other hand, I do understand where some people maybe they don't go through the difficult conversations or they don't do that inner work and they go, oh, this is getting difficult. I'm just going to end the marriage. Who cares? I'll get married again.
Of course.
So yeah. I understand. Yeah. So on the other side of it, there's that. But I think that there is real value, like you said, in sitting down with that and learning from those experiences and things that have ended and what have you learned from it. So for yourself, Mark, going through, you said you were engaged at one point and then you left that. Some of the personal lessons you've learned about yourself, can you share that insight that you got from that, from stepping away from that grief, from that pain, from being betrayed? Like, has it been a deeper sense of self-value? What have you taken away from that now that you bring into your everyday life?
Oh man, so much. Those early betrayals when I was 17 and 19, they would cause me to run from women who could love me. And so actually in the very act of avoiding being betrayed again, the betrayal lived. Like, because it changed my behavior, it was forever, until I realized it, it was forever in my patterns. So if you avoid love because you've been hurt by love, then the pain of your hurt actually is what guides your decisions, not informs them, guides them. Because if you really, there's a old proverb that goes something along the lines of, knowledge is a nuisance till it becomes integrated. And I really think a lot about that one of the rules I made actually when I left the engagement was that I would have every conversation I didn't want to have, because those were the ones that mattered. Those were the ones when I was like, how did I get here? It was because I ran from every hard conversation. And I realized that, well, wait, if I had the hard conversation, even if the relationship ended, we'd be liberated. That's why I love a quote from Elizabeth Gilbert in Glennon Doyle's book, where she says, there's no such thing as one-way liberation. Like, if you are freed, someone else is always. They just don't know it yet. Yeah, so like liberation for one is always liberation for two. And so if you free yourself from a pattern, the other person is freed from a pattern, even if they don't have a choice in it. And I think that could be hard, because if you're left, you could see yourself as the victim of being left, not to actually see that you're being liberated. Because of course, there is the side of that can be like the betrayal I experienced, for example. That betrayal, though, was really interesting when I looked back, as I saw that all, and this is a delicate line, what I'm about to say, all of the external betrayals I experienced in my life were because they were preceded by an internal betrayal. So it was naturally the outcome that I was going to get cheated on. Not that it's my fault, but it was naturally the outcome that I got cheated on because I didn't honor my truest truths in the relationships. I didn't speak up for myself. I didn't have boundaries. Like the second example, the girl went away for school on a scholarship, and we agreed that we could see other people. We'll just tell each other about it. And then I just was never told about it. And then all of a sudden it came out and it was a whole mess. But what was interesting about that is that I didn't want to see other people. I agreed to something I didn't want, and then I ended up in the exact circumstances I didn't want to be in. And so I started to see, so the first one was have all the conversations I didn't want to have. And the second one was always live at my highest level of knowledge. That like the moment that I know something, I must integrate it into my life or else it's suffering. Then it's just chosen suffering. And, you know, I think what can be hard about that is that most of us will not make choices till we have to. But there is so many lines of choose to that precede that. And I think we can, you know, legitimize that sometimes it's not the right time to make a choice. Sure. But I think what is strategy versus excuse? And I think that's a delicate line that us as humans can really rationalize. And we just need people who love us, and maybe that's coaches or therapists or best friends, who actually hold us to a level of integrity that our being desires, you know, like you were talking about, like that level of integrity of self-expression, of whatever it might be. And Ram Dass says that integrity is when the truths that live within you are the same as the truths that live outside of you. And I think that's something to be aspired to. I don't think you're ever fully 100% into it in integrity because you're always learning. But can we do our best to honor what we know?
Beautiful, dude. What are some of your highest values now? Do you rank them, or do you just have a collection of values that you live your life by?
Yeah. Well, you know, my body will tell me when I'm not honoring it. truth ahead of everything, you know. That became just really evident for me through COVID, that I was like not willing to compromise reality in order to maintain group membership. And I was willing to be disliked in order to maintain my connection to reality. I feel like that was a challenge that a lot of people had. And I spoke about that compromise of authenticity versus belonging, right? Versus connection. And I don't desire belonging of any kind that requires the abandonment of truth. And because I know the pain of that, I know what that's like. That's what cultures that are created upon that are toxic.
Yeah.
And so there's this line where I want to navigate being compassionate, but also saying I'm not going to abandon. I made a rule that I just would no longer collude with someone in their own fantasies. So that's a deep one for me, like freedom to express, freedom to have hard conversations. I think that we live in a time where dialogue and actually exploring things that are uncomfortable is actually the pathway to the future of humanity, and that opposing views actually enrich deeper, more wise views. Instead of silencing each other, there should actually be a table where we all speak, but most sides don't invite the other, and then they call it a diverse talk or a debate. But it's not a debate. It's a conversation where the speaking points are generally pre-discussed. You know, so for me, those are big. And those are similar in romantic relationship, that I have a dedication to truth with my wife, uncomfortable truth. I have a son who's 2.5. It's, you know, it's obviously different now with him, but it continues to be like, I know that the key to really healthy relationships is ruptures and repairs. Like to have conflict is normal. It's just how you navigate conflict that determines your relational success. And I think as a culture, we need that example more now than ever in individual relationships, because they're what compose culture. And so we need to be able to model that within ourselves. And I think so many of us have been taught to not even sit and break bread with people we disagree with, and yet it will be the extension of the community table that is the healing of humanity, in my view.
I love that, Mark. I think I'm thinking about what you said there about those difficult conversations that create ruptures or fractures or challenge. You know, just like you're going to the gym, you're building a muscle, you're tearing the muscle fibers. Then you need to take time off for those muscle fibers to grow back stronger. And yet in our conversations, in our communication, when it comes to those, whether it be in an intimate relationship or in a, you know, in your family, there's, you know, drama or whatever, often it's like it's shoved aside. We don't want to have these conversations at Thanksgiving or at Christmas or whatever holidays, just like bury it, because we want to protect this sort of illusion of peace or of whatever it is that we're trying to maintain. So how do you coach or guide people to repair or to navigate when you're having those difficult conversations? What is the skill set that you need to go into that conversation, to express that truth, to express how you're feeling, and then also to repair afterwards, to move through that rupture, to build back stronger? How do you guide people through that?
Well, two humans to navigate any conflict would require mutual desire for responsibility. You know, to recognize that, like, even in the most challenging of relational circumstances, there is two people who are choosing to be in those circumstances. Now, we can go into power dynamics and all that, and that would all be relevant. You know, that would all be context that would be relevant. And it's, can I take responsibility for my role in this conversation? And can I actually, in taking responsibility, for example, the 4 most prevalent behaviors that are evidenced to be predictive of divorce, they're in all relationships, but when they're in higher quantity, they lead to divorce. This is from the Gottman's research. And in the Gottman's research, they could listen to a couple argue and predict with 92 or 93% accuracy if they divorced. That's freaking wild. They could listen to just the first 3 minutes, and it was like over 80% accuracy. So it tells you a lot that the words we're choosing are actually determining the world we're living in. And so what they see is, I mean, one of the statements that they call it is a harsh startup. So how conversations begin tends to be how they end. But the 4 things they see, they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So no shortage of intensity in how they describe them. So criticism, statements like you always, you never. Defensiveness, that's like not just arguing back, but actually like catapulting back. Oh, you want to talk about me being late? Let's talk about that time that you cheated on me, right? So there's like a whole, that inflames it. Again, not invalidating the people's perspectives, but showing that that's not the path, because you probably have something unresolved about the infidelity in there, FYI. And then contempt, which is things like rolling of the eyes. That's actually the greatest predictor of divorce, rolling of the eyes as behavior. And then stonewalling, which is withdrawing, shutting down, ghosting, hanging up, all that kind of stuff. And so they pair together. They dance well together. And the antidotes to those things are how we bring solutions to relationship, because we have to remember that behind every trigger is a wound that's trying to be resolved. So if I develop defensiveness, for example, because that's one that I'm very familiar with, that's my MO, the antidote to defensiveness is to say to somebody, I can see some truth in what you're saying. Well, shit. If you have defensive,ness, have you tried? Yeah, like you might as well just eat your own shoe. You're like a stinky post-athletic activity shoe. It's hard because what it's saying is if I hold the both end, that your feedback, let's say, usually I'm defensive to criticism, but I might be sensitive to any feedback, because what's going on in my own being is that if I let you down or you have a complaint about me, you might leave me, or I'm not enough for you, and then you'll leave me. And that's usually a pattern that's designed from childhood, probably in your own parents' relational dynamic, maybe something you witnessed. And so if I say I can see some truth in what you're saying, then now I have to be with what I'm probably feeling as a deficit within myself. And so I have to be with that. I have to be with that I've felt not enough. Not in this circumstance, although it's happening. It's probably really historic. And so that's why there's so much potency and beauty in the resolution of conflict and the changing of behaviors and patterns, because something really tender is actually asking to be witnessed. And that's why I see that the defensiveness and the contempt and the stonewalling and the criticism, these are all behaviors. And the interesting thing is about behaviors is they're not who you are. So you could change them. But deeply held in the behavior is a strategy to not get hurt again. So we have to say like, oh, you're stonewalling, you're hanging up, you're leaving, you're shutting down. That's actually a really brilliant strategy given what you've been through. So we bring compassion. My defensiveness, oh my gosh, what a brilliant strategy to not get hurt again, yet you're living in it. And so that actually comes back to your original question, which is like, if I am keeping the peace, but it requires that I don't talk about important things, then I'm not actually at peace. I'm internalizing the chaos. So I'm avoiding conflict outside of myself so that I don't experience that rupture. But within myself, I am ruptured. I have an inner conflict that is going to show up as anxiety, depression, probably addictions. That's where the relationship to food and devices and all that stuff will come up. And so in that inner conflict, because I don't want to be with the pain of the abandonment or betrayal of my own self, I then need something to anesthetize the pain. So if you think about it, anytime you have an addiction to something that changes your state, which is everything we get addicted to, it's because I don't want to be in the state I'm in. I don't want to feel something, so I want to replace that feeling with something else. So that feeling of betraying oneself is deep. It's a deep form of suffering. And so I'll develop an addiction to stay in the environmental circumstances that recreate the very thing I'm trying to avoid. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So coming back to the behaviors, the 4 horsemen, for example, is my wife and I would say, okay, well, we're having this continued conflict. It's about different things, but the way it plays out, the dance it plays is the same. So a great way to figure out what your pattern is you just go like, when you do this, I do this, which makes you do this, which makes me do this. So for example, it would be like, when you get upset, I get reactive. It makes you more upset, and then I shut down. Mm-hmm. And so there's a woman named Mona Fishbane, and she calls this the vulnerability cycle. That basically, like, we're just going to have a dance, and it's going to be a dance our parents probably did that we said we'd never do, you know, or we are doing the opposite of it, or we became the other side of it, or whatever. And so the way to find our way out of it, if you think about it, is like, speaking of that line of there's no such thing as one-way liberation, is that if our familiar conflict strategy is, let's call it the Macarena, and then all of a sudden you, Graham, decide that, like, you start to explore the way that you speak in conflict, etc., and you change the way you're speaking to me, you're now doing the two-step. But I'm committed to the Macarena. I don't even know what the two-step is. But you're bringing it to me. And now if you're leading me, and at least you don't have to make them aware of it, but if you do make them aware that we're trying a different communication style, or you're just doing it anyways, I either have to try to double you back to get you back in to the Macarena, or I'm like, whoa, what's, like, normally you get defensive. Or normally you say, hey, you never do this. And now you're saying, well, in my experience, when this happens, this comes up for me. If I'm defensive, I'm like, wait, what? You just used a lot of language of self-responsibility. Like, how do I attack you?
Yeah.
You didn't even say anything about me. And you said your experience, not our experience. So now I have an experience that's independent of your experience. Mm. So now you've created, unconsciously, you've created space for me that I didn't know I needed. And so now we've created two worlds. I have a world, you have a world. So we've actually gone like this, where most relationships are enmeshed in that dance. You've actually, on your own, done this. And through the way you use language, you've allowed me to still exist. And you would create safety so that this isn't terrifying. Because for a lot of people, this separation is actually the problem. And of course, you have a whole group of people that this is terrifying. So just to add to it. Yeah. So when you actually change that behavior, you're liberated and we're liberated. And now the relationship is invited to a totally different place and a totally different way of being. Should I accept the responsibility of that?
Yeah. Yeah, it does take two to jump into that opening of that, changing the dance. Because if somebody is unwilling to, you can't really get anywhere. Both people have to be willing. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can't really do this one-sided.
Yeah, you know, I was interviewing the Gottmans once, and that was like one of those moments where you're like, oh, God, praise be. And I said so they wrote a book called 8 Dates. It's a pretty cool book. It's great for all couples. And it's like 8 essential conversations all couples should have. And I said to her, well, it's like a pretty big red flag if the other person doesn't want to read the book with you. Like, do you just like, you're done? Like, you won't read 8 Dates, you're out? And she was like, Mark, no. She was like, you need to be curious why. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. That's so nice of you. You must have written that book. And I really, look, yes, you 100% need two people who are willing to take responsibility for the relationship they're co-creating. So all relationships are co-created and everyone's 100% responsible for their 50%. Everyone needs to agree to develop at least the humility of recognizing that you are part of it. Without that humility, you're not going anywhere. And as you said, without the just, hey, I am part of this. A lot of people stay in the victim place. Like, no, you're the reason that we are the way we are. But I could go into what's the other side of that? It could be enabling. It could be hypercriticism. There could be lots of things. So without two people saying I have a part, even if the part is tolerating bullshit behavior.
I could explore this topic with you at length. We only have so much time here, Mark, and there's so much more I want to cover. So I'm going to ask you more questions in the after party as well. But I want to jump to some questions, first of all, about silence, about how that is so difficult for some people, and stillness. You talk a lot about, people waiting in line at Starbucks and they can't help but reach for that phone and pull it up and get distracted. I want to cover that. I also want to cover the relationship to our environment and to money. I know you have courses on improving your relationship with finances and wealth. So I also want to kind of expand the conversation into more aspects of relationship. So let's do that. Let's start with our relationship to silence and stillness, why that's so difficult for people. How do you see that, and why is that?
Well, it's so interesting because it's so coupled with where we are with technology now. So, I remember hearing a spiritual teacher say that silence is who you are. And I remember just feeling that, just like, whoa, it's actually in the space between beats. It's in the moment of silence that you truly meet yourself, that you're truly exposed to the thoughts you don't want. And of course, when you have a thought or a feeling you don't want, what you then do is you go to something to distract you from your state. Now, we could argue that everyone in society uses their phone all the time, so that's just part of life. No, everyone is addicted to their phone, and so that's just part of society. And so there's something about not wanting to be with the way that we're feeling. And so you really want to look for whatever you can't be with is actually inviting you to mastery. So it's like, if you can't put your phone down, then you're not in choice with your phone. And I noticed this with myself, that I didn't know why I had so much anxiety about Instagram, but I had to leave it. And then in my leaving of it, I discovered, because my friend said to me, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, you're on LinkedIn and you're on TikTok and you're on these other ones. Why Instagram? And I was like, that's a good question. Like, I hadn't sat with him long enough to get these types of questions. They're a little annoying. And he's one of those guys. And I was like, okay. And then he's like, I'm just curious, like, you were asking this question before, and what I realized that humans do is that we reject things we don't know yet how to relate to. So, for example, I don't drink, and I think alcohol is an interesting example because there's some people who could just sit and have a beer. And I might be able to just sit and have a beer now, but before I liked having 6 of them. And it was because there was something about being in relationship to that thing that I just overconsumed. Because there was something I was avoiding within myself. And I remember hearing this, a line from a book from Paul Selig, where it said, your body can only alchemize the lowest level of truth that you're willing to hold. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, but that's interesting. There's something in that line. And then he said, what is one thing you know to be true that you don't live?
Good question.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, shoot, that I need alcohol to connect. And then he said, so then he's like, so if I don't integrate that, then my body can't alchemize because that's the lowest level of truth I'm willing to hold, right? So now this is interesting because when I did a medicine ceremony, I asked the medicine for guidance. And the medicine said to me, you don't even live the things we tell you, we're not going to tell you anymore. And so I wrote this thing. Dude, it was like, no more for you. Because you're not believing in abundance because you don't trust the message. So you don't actually trust what you're asking for, so F you. Like, we're not giving you more. But it made me write this idea that when you forgo a truth you know, you trade a truth you need. So when you know something and you don't live it, you actually trade a truth you actually need to live. So you trade a truth you actually seek. Because you're still stuck on the first lesson. And so I think within silence is where you find those incongruences. In silence is where you actually hear that inner self. There's that saying that if you can't meditate for 10 minutes, you need 4 hours. That's so true. I mean, for me, it was like 10 minutes. I used to set a timer for 5 minutes and it was terrifying. Now I'm like, be quiet. Like, this is great. But there are times when I run from it, and that's busyness of life. And so that's why things like an algorithm will hook into your inconsistencies and your incongruences.
Yeah. I think it's Louis Pascal who said that all of man's troubles come from not being able to sit in a room alone with your thoughts, basically to meditate, to be there, and just to feel what's actually going on. I think that's who said it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I've thought a lot about that in my own life through float tanks and sensory deprivation experiences I've had in meditation retreats. The truths that are uncomfortable that come up from the stillness, from the silence. And it's scary sometimes because my mind wants to hold on to the way things are. And if I confront this, if I look at this, then I have to let go and I have to see what I've been avoiding, which can be very difficult, but then also at the same time, the most liberating and expansive experience when taken head on with compassion for yourself and seeing what's happening so that you can grow and you can let it go, or you can step into it, or you can, take action in whatever way you feel you're being called. So thank you, Mark, for sharing that, because silence for me is so sacred. And I left that quote. I'd love to know who that teacher was that said that.
It was Gangaji.
Gangaji. Oh, I've never heard of that.
Gangaji.
Oh, Gangaji.
Her name is probably like Susan from the Midwest, but her name is Gangaji. She's a profound teacher.
Awesome, dude.
And I found her when I needed her, as so happens.
Awesome. I have a couple questions here that I want to ask from our community, our sovereign creators, as we call them. So Linda asks, what is the difference between people-pleasing and codependency? Is people-pleasing a component of codependency, or is there even a difference?
Yeah, it's a component of codependency. So my wife and I, in our book, Liberated Love, we define codependency as when you source safety and or security from something or someone at the cost of yourself. So people-pleasing is an adaptive strategy that says, if I keep you happy, I keep myself safe. So it is a component of. So what it does is it prioritizes everyone else's feelings. And it comes from a really young place. Like if you think developmentally, that's a really young age. So it's likely that we sort of got arrested in that developmental spot, which doesn't mean we can't free ourselves from it. It's that we have to be with the fear of like, what does happen if people are upset with you? What happens if people are disappointed in you? Now, when you have like a friend or a partner who activates that in you, but can actually hold like, I'm disappointed in you saying no to, for example, helping me move, that it's like, it's fine. Like, let them. I guess it's Mel Robbins who says that, right? Let them. That it would be the uncoupling of codependency. It's probably why the book's so successful. It's just so simple. They're mad, let them.
Yeah.
But also that being really tender with that is an adaptive strategy. So that comes from a really beautiful place where you had to make sure that everyone else was okay for you to be okay. But at some point, because there's a pretty high correlation of that type of behavior to things like autoimmune and inflammation in the body, right? So it's actually being able to recognize that in people-pleasing is a lot of self-abandonment. There's not a self. Everything's about other. And so that is now going into the curiosity of who you are, what created it, what do you like, what's adventures you can go on. Can you do something once a day, once a week that's about an investment in yourself? That would be important.
Awesome. Dia says, how do you forgive a family member who has passed away?
Such a great question.
Yeah.
There's a great line from Buddy Wakefield in a spoken word poem that he did called Crowbirds and Mockingbars. And he says that forgiveness is, one, letting go of all hope for a better past. And he said that forgiveness is for those who deserve safe travel through my mind. And I think a lot about forgiveness and closure, we think about someone else, right? We think about like, how do I forgive someone who's died? So innately in that question is, they're not here to resolve this thing. So if they're not here, how do I do it? Mm-hmm. So innately in the question is that the power lives in their behavior, right? Like if they were here to help resolve it, or I could express this, then we would bring forgiveness and closure. And so it's to recognize that like you are actually the author of this. You're in power. So forgiveness is really a mythical thing because it can just occur, right? Like I would always ask someone, what is holding you back from? Because then
holding on. Say that again.
So what is holding you back from?
Okay.
So this happens a lot with heartbreak. If I'm holding on to the heartbreak, then I'm not letting myself love again. I'm not putting myself out there. I'm not whatever. And so I'm always like, then do all those things. Because innately, if you do those things, then you're not holding on anymore. And what's really interesting is when you seek to forgive something, it reinforces its existence. Right? Because if I say I need to let this go, then in the very act of letting it go, I'm holding on to it. It's a really etheric kind of thought, right? Because then people go, but there's really something to forgive. Okay, great. Then maybe bring in, what would forgiveness mean? Where does it live in your body? What's stuck? If it could speak, what would it say? If it wanted to be let go, what would it ask you to do? And then you can create, like, we don't realize how important things like fire is and ceremony. Light a candle in honor of what you're holding on to. Write a letter to the person. Set up a chair that is empty with them in it. Read the letter to them. And then, if you really want a powerful experience, if it feels okay, you get up and you get in the other chair and you answer as them. And then you get back in the other chair and you have a conversation. And then when you're done, you make the intention of that to express yourself and be complete. And then when you're done, you blow the candle out and it is done. You give it up to whatever, the heavens, you have the earth take it, whatever it is.
Beautiful. I have a similar sort of practice I'll do with myself sometimes when I'm speaking to I guess you call it my inner child, and I'll envision them sitting beside me, but I've never heard of that as in the example of forgiveness, of putting that person in front of you and having a conversation with them. I love that. And hopefully, Dia, that's helpful for you as well. Thank you for asking that question. I have a couple more questions for you, Mark, before we head over to the after party. I know many of you guys, I can see you guys on timehascome.com with your comments and questions. So we're going to head on over to that real quick. But I want to ask Mark two of my favorite questions before we wrap up the podcast. This one is called my golden ticket. So you remember Willy Wonka and the Charlie Factory when you get the golden ticket and he's like, oh, I got the golden ticket. So that's a metaphor I've used as a way to express what is so beautiful about the work that someone does. You know, it's the golden ticket. Why do they do what they do? What's the moment for you, Mark, that you sit back after a day or you're walking with your wife and your kid and you're like, man, I love my life. I love today. I love what happened today. I just feel so blessed to be here. What is that for you?
I think it's when someone witnesses their own power. Like when through some sort of awareness, they witness that the answer is not found in someone else or some authority, that it is found within themselves. And maybe sometimes we need the right words in the right order to orchestrate it or unlock the puzzle. But it's when people actually liberate from a pattern that is such a beautiful gift to witness.
Come back home to themselves and their power.
Yeah, where you're like, they're like, oh yeah, I don't need you. Yeah, you don't. Great call.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. And my last question, this is a fun one I came up with while I was hanging out on set on the Heartland TV show, and I was waiting for them to put up the lights. This is before everybody had cell phones, so we weren't distracted. Nobody was looking at their phones. And I was just sitting there bored. And this question popped into my mind. And I started asking people the question, and their answers were very just different and then unique. And I was like, whoa, like, what is this? So it's a fun question, Mark, and it goes like this. If you had on your wall, maybe in your room or in your living room or whatever, a magic painting, and anytime you looked at this magic painting, you could feel any feeling you wanted to feel to any degree that you wanted to feel it, what feeling would you choose, and what would be on your painting to represent that? It could be abstract, it could be a specific picture.
Well, I already know a picture would likely be like the rainforest, the Pacific Northwest. And there's something about the Pacific Northwest and a rainforest that the miracles are just so explicit. Like they're so obvious. They're not hiding It's like the ferns and the crows and the mist, and nature is just has maybe no humility in the rainforest, which is a beautiful thing. It's just pride. And the feeling I would feel is, just being surrounded by the miraculous. That reminder of like, oh yeah, like none of it matters. None of the little shit.
So when you let go of all the little stuff, it's all gone, and you're surrounded by the miraculous, what's the feeling that emerges? Is it peace? What comes up?
Yeah, it's peace, love.
Peace and love?
Yeah.
Yeah. The follow-up to this question is, as an actor, I love to understand emotions and where people and how people feel them. So if somebody's never felt this type of peace and love before, Mark, how would you explain you feel it in your body?
It's so embodied in the rainforest and the ancient cedars and Douglas firs because they're so rooted in the earth. And I think it's that feeling like you have when you're sitting around a campfire and you're with people you love, that you just realize like there's a rooted, grounded nature to it. Yeah.
So so this feeling is through your whole body and it grounds you at the same time?
Yeah. It's like just a deep, like, I am an oak, I am a cedar. Yeah. And the smell of the water. I just love it, man.
Awesome, Mark. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I'm a big fan
Thanks
of
for
camping.
Asking. It's a great question.
I'm a big fan of asking this question because I get to learn.
Van. You were
Say
van
again?
life. You were van life.
Yeah. I sold the van, but I love the van. And being outside and being with friends around a campfire is one of my favorite things, especially being a Boy Scout as a kid. Just sitting around the fire, enjoying that feeling of being free and being surrounded by, like you said, that miraculous, beautiful nature is a beautiful feeling. And I always try to get out there as much as I can because that's where I feel most at home, is in the trees and in the forest and the mountains and stuff. So thank you for sharing that. As we wrap up this podcast, if you're interested in listening and working with or watching more of Mark Groves, you can check out his links below this podcast. You can work with them. You can check out createthelove.com. You have markgroves.com as well, Mark. You have a community that helps coach people and works with people. You also have other coaches that work with you to help and support people in their relationships, which is great. So if you want to find all that information and more, you can check out the links below. But Mark, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast. And if you could leave everybody with a message or a final well wish, what would you share with them?
The world needs you, Bold. It needs you. Like that actually is what your relationships need. Everyone needs you in your fullest self-expression, because that is an invitation for everyone to step into theirs. And that is, there's nothing more powerful, more attractive, more grounding, more healing to the self than to be like, hey, when it comes the choice between, me or them, I choose me, and then I choose them. That's a beautiful, grounded feeling.
I got a question for you. Why'd you stay to the end? Most people only listen to the first 15, 20% of a podcast, but you listened all the way through, which puts you in the top 10, 15% of people that listen to podcasts. So what was it? Maybe you have a question. Maybe there's something you're working on. Maybe there's a fascinating insight that you have. I would love to hear it. That's why I built timehascome.com as a community for you to share your insights and your questions. After the podcast, we launch into the after party with my guests, and you get a chance to ask your question, continue the conversation, learn more, and dig deeper into the topics covered. So if that sounds interesting to you, head on over to timehascome.com and leave a comment. Share with me what you found interesting, insightful, a question you have. And if you want to join for my next podcast recording and ask your question live to my guest, sign up, become a paying member. I'd love to have you. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.